Hello and welcome to Spardha Lines, your one-stop destination for the civil services preparation, UPSC, KPSC and other relevant examinations. Today we have picked up a couple of important articles which are very significant from your UPSC and your KPSC examination point of view. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article here is speaking about the governor powers. What is this article all about? We have the government of the day. We have the legislature. The legislature, what is its business? The legislature will basically make the laws. And after they make the laws, if there is a bill that is proposed by the legislature, that is by the Council of Ministers, the Council of Ministers will ultimately make this bill and give it to the governor. So what should the governor do? The governor should basically give assent to the bill. Only then it will become an act. So what exactly happens in the legislative business? We have the Council of Ministers. They would have prepared a draft. This will become a bill. The bill will ultimately go to one house, that is the Legislative Assembly. And if the Legislative Assembly approves, it will go to the governor only if it is Legislative Assembly. What if there are two houses? In case there are two houses, that is the Legislative Council, in that case, if both the houses passes the bill, it ultimately goes to the governor. So the governor in this particular case can give the assent to the bill, or he can refer the same to the president, or he can withhold the bill. And when he withholds, then there is no time limit in this particular case, and as a result, many governments in the states, for example the state government of Kerala, and for example it has happened in Rajasthan, it has also happened in West Bengal as well, it has also happened in Maharashtra as well, where the Council of Ministers have proposed a bill and this has gone to the governor, but the governor holds the bill and does not give assent to the bill, and as a result it continues to be pending bills. So in this article, what we will be discussing is about the pending bills where the Council of Ministers have sent it to the governor. The governor has not even given the assent to this particular bill. He withholds this particular bill, does not react to this particular bill, does not give it to the governor, or does not give reasons to the bill, and ultimately the legislative business is not turning successfully. And as a result, what is that we have to speak about and understand about pending bills is what is this article all about. When we speak about the relationship between the Council of Ministers and the governor, we have the governor who has the discretionary powers. But then once you look at the discretionary powers of the governor, there are two types of discretionary powers. One is the constitutional discretion, the other happens to be the situational discretion. We will look into that. But whenever a legislative business has been undertaken, a bill has been sent to the governor in most of the situations will have to accept this particular bill and give assent to it. And even if the governor does not act so, why is he not acting so? He may have to give reasons to the same as well. Now remember, whenever we have a legislative business, the Council of Ministers proposing a particular bill, the governor has to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Yes, there are few discretionary powers that are given to the governor, but is it absolute in nature? No. That is, whenever there is the Council of Ministers, they give a proposal. This proposal has to be accepted by the governor. Why? Because Article 163 of the Indian Constitution clearly mandates that he has to act only on the advice of the Council of Ministers with the Chief Minister as the head of the state. Why is it so? That is because when you look at the Constituent Assembly debates and what happened during the formation stage of the Constitution, they were very clear with this particular point. What we have as the president at the central level, we will have the governor at the state level. There will be discretions that will be given to the president. Similar such discretion will also be given to the governors as well. But in comparison, the governor may have a bit of more discretion as well. So what is at the central level, the same will also be present at the state level as well. And also during the Constituent Assembly debates, it was also discussed when we have the Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister who are elected by the people. Why should the governor be given more powers where he is selected by the central government? Remember, we have the governor who wears two hats. What do we understand by two hats? One, he is the representative of the state. He is the head of the executive at the state level, and at the same time he is also the messenger of the central government. He is been appointed by the central government. So in order to prevent vicissitudes attitude of the state government, he keeps sending fortnightly reports to the central government. So he wears two hats, which means he is the representative of the state and he is also the messenger of the central government. So during the Constituent Assembly debates, they decided that since we have the elected government in the form of the Council of Ministers with the Chief Minister as the head, they should be holding utmost power. They happen to have the de facto power, and the governor will only have the de jure power, which means to say all the aid and advice that is given by the Council of Ministers will ultimately have to be listened, heard and ultimately implemented by the governor. So who is the real power authority? It is the Council of Ministers. So Article 163 of the Indian Constitution clearly says that the governor has to listen to the Council of Ministers, that the governor has to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, and the discretion can be used only in exceptional circumstances. In Shamsher Singh versus the state of Punjab, the Supreme Court held that the president or the governor can exercise their discretion independent of their ministers only where the Constitution expressly permits them to do so. So what are the discretionary powers that are given to the governor? There are two types of discretion. One is the constitutional discretion, the other happens to be the situational discretion. What is the constitutional discretion that we are speaking about? Let's say for example we have the governor and the president. What are the constitutional discretion? Let's say for example we have the governor. The governor basically believes that he has to send one of the bills to the president. Why? That is because there could be a provision or a legislative making where the legislature basically decides to remove the power of the High Court. In that case, the governor will have to refer this to the president. That is the constitutional discretion. Added to it, let's say for example if the governor feels that president's rule will have to be imposed, in that case he also sends a report to the president. That happens to be his discretion. So when he has to refer the bill to the president, that is his constitutional discretion, or there has to be the president's rule that will be imposed, that is his constitutional discretion. And whether there is a particular measure that is being taken by the chief minister, asking the chief minister for what his recommendations are, that happens to be the constitutional discretion of the governor. However, there are some situational discretions as well. What are these situational discretions? Let's say for example there is an election that has taken place, and this election no single party has got the majority. Let's say for example we have about 200 seats in the legislative assembly. Out of 200, any political party which has got more than 100, that is 101, will ultimately form the government, but no single political party has been able to form the majority. So this is where there is situational discretion that is given to the governor, where he can ask one of the political parties to form the government and eventually show the confidence. That is situational discretion. Added to it, let's say for example there is no confidence that is placed in the government of the day. In that case he can ask the government to show their confidence, throw their numbers in the floor of the house. That is the situational discretion. So when it comes to the discretion, yes, the governor does have the constitutional discretion, he does have the situational discretion as well. It is only these aspects that the governor has the discretion. But what about the bills? When the bills are made, these bills are ultimately given to the governor, and the governor will have to give the assent under Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. So if we look into two important articles, what we have is Article 163 of the Indian Constitution, what we have is Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 163 says that the Council of Ministers will be at the head of the helms, and then the Chief Minister at the head to aid and advise the governor in the exercise of his functions, except in so far as he is by under this constitution required to exercise his function under any of them in his discretion. What is this discretion? That is what we just discussed. So in most of the aspects, only those areas where he's got the discretion, that is the constitutional discretion and the situational discretion, the governor can act independently. But in rest of the scenarios, what we have is the governor who has to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of of ministers headed by the chief minister. That is what is Article 163 of the Indian Constitution. Then if a bill has been proposed, it has been made and ultimately given to the president, ultimately given to the governor, what is that he has to do? He has to give his assent to the bill. Once he gives the consent and a signature to that particular bill, it will immediately become an act. End of the story. Or what is that he can also do? He can also withhold his assent. That is, he will not give his signature onto that particular bill, or he can reserve this bill for the consideration of the president. Now, the first part is clear, that he signs the bill and it becomes an act. Second part says withholds the assent therefrom, which means that he can withhold the assent, that he need not have to give the assent. Once he does not give the assent, how long he did not give the assent is the major picture. There is no time limit as well, and that is why we have increasing cases of pendency of the bills with respect to the legislature and the governor. So what does he do? He withholds it as assent, and as a result it does not become an act. What if the governor returns the bill? When he returns the bill, let's say for example we have the government of the day, and the government of the day feels that this particular bill will have to become an act, and if it sends for the second time, then the governor will have to act immediately and will have to give the assent as well. So what is the major point here? Withholding the assent. And when there is withholding the assent, there is no time limit before which he has to act upon it, and as a result what we have is the pending bills in the picture. So if he does not give permission to it, if he does not act on to it, there is no fixed timeline before which he has to give permission and the signature and the consent to that particular legislation, and as a result it becomes the pending bill, which is the discussion of this article. Since he does not give permission to that particular legislation, it continues to be a bill, and as a result many state governments are suffering. Why are they suffering? That is because of couple of reasons. What are these reasons? One, we have the government. The government is elected by the will of the people. So when they are elected by the will of the people, they can ultimately come up with a legislation, and this particular bill is proposed by that particular government, and if given permission, this will become an act. So let's say they have come up with a bill which is for the welfare of the people. For example, if we take the picture of the state government of Karnataka, the state government of Karnataka came up with, they had a political manifesto which said that women will be provided free bus passes, they can travel within the buses, there will be free electricity for a particular period of time, then they will also be able to provide other means and measures for the senior citizens, where they will be provided about 2,000 to 3,000, so on and so forth. This is the political manifesto, and as a result people elected them. So if people have elected them for their political manifesto, and if the governor does not give assent to it, it is violating the will of the people. And when you look at the preamble of the Indian Constitution, it says we the people of India. When the people of India and the people of the state have elected a government to enact laws which reflect their will because the political manifesto has given rise to it, who is the governor who happens to be a selected person to stop it is one of the contention. So if the governor is withholding the assent, who happens to be the selected person from the central government and not the elected person, it is violating the will of the people, and this could lead to breakdown of the parliamentary democracy, functioning of the state government, and ultimately damage the government's reputation. The government's reputation could be at stake. It has won a political it has won this political elections on the basis of the manifesto. If the governor is not giving permission to it, the governor's reputation could be at stake. When it comes to the political parties, they are accountable to the people. They have elections every 5 years. They are accountable, and people may throw them as well. But with respect to the governor, they cannot be removed. He can be removed only by the central government. So where is the accountability of the governor if he is withholding that particular legislation? So these are the major concerns if the pending bill increases and the governor does not give assent to the bill. So in order to overcome this particular issue, what is the way forward? The way forward is there has to be a fixed timeline. There has to be a time period before which the governor will have to give the consent. So it means that the Supreme Court, or there has to be an amendment which says that within a period of 6 months, or within a period of 3 months, or within a period of so many weeks or days, that the governor will have to give assent to the bill. This has to be clarified by the Supreme Court of India or by the Constitution. Apart from that, the media has to focus on it, and there has to be a charted timeline before which the central government should also issue directions to the governor to ensure that this particular bill ultimately becomes an act. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this topic. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about noise pollution. This is an ad that was given on the Hindu Delhi edition. So what we have to understand is noise pollution is an important aspect in your GS paper 3, environment and ecology. First, we have to understand the meaning of noise. What is noise? Unwanted sound is called as noise. Something which is irritating, something which creates a stress, which is unwanted for us, is called as noise. For example, there is industrial activity that is happening, or there is a person who is constantly honking, that is, he's pressing on the horn button in the traffic. It causes stress, it causes unwanted sound to us, and this could lead to irritation. That is what is called as noise pollution. So when it comes to the noise pollution, we have one major law, then we have to look at the definition, then we have to look at the rules and the law, and then what has the Supreme Court spoken about it. Section 2A of the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981 defines air pollutant to mean any solid, liquid or gaseous substance, including noise, present in the atmosphere in such concentration as may tend to be injurious to the human beings or other living creatures or plants or property or environment. So it means any unwanted sound that we have which could be injurious to the human being or to other living creatures is noise. And at the same time, in order to discuss about this noise, what we have is the central government which has notified Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Rules of 2000, and we have the Supreme Court of India which has also clarified that in the state of Rajasthan versus G. Chawla, it has clearly clarified that when it comes to the states, they would be able to come up with the laws. Why? That is because when it comes to the health and public health, it is an aspect of the state government under the state list in the 7th schedule. So they would be able to also come up and draw laws for the control of the noise pollution. So how is noise pollution classified? We have the World Health Organization which identify 5 sources. One is road traffic, second happens to be railways, third happens to be aircraft, fourth is wind turbines, fifth is about leisure. However, India frames noise pollution rules for zones. What are these zones? One is industrial, second happens to be commercial, third happens to be residential, and fourth happens to be silent. So for these zones that have been discussed, there is a principal threshold that is defined. Let's say, for example, it should not be beyond 55 decibels, it should not be beyond 75 decibels, it should not be beyond 65 decibels. These are the thresholds that are defined for a specific area. If it is beyond 55 decibels, let's say in the residential property, it can be classified as noise, and immediately measures will have to be taken in order to prevent such threshold breach as well. So what we have is certain zones that have been identified according to the Indian laws. So if we look into how these zonings are done and what is the limit, according to World Health Organization guidelines, for the daylight limit, the maximum it can reach is 53 decibel, and the maximum that it can reach for the night time is 45. Anything beyond this will be assumed as what is called as the noise pollution. Similarly, we have it for the railways, we have it for the aircraft, we have it for the wind turbine as well. And for India, what we have is the industrial area, where for the night 75 decibels and in the daylight it is 75. For the commercial area, it is 65 when it comes to decibels for the daylight, and when it comes to the night time it is 55 decibels. For the residential area, it is 55 decibels in the daylight, and in the night it is 45 decibels. In the silent zone, it is 50 in the daylight and 40 in the night time. So beyond which, if it is crossing, that is what is going to lead to managing or calling this as noise. So what is noise? Noise is unwanted sound. So if there is breach of this decibel that is established, in that case it will be called as noise as well. So what are the sources of noise? Whenever we consider the sources of noise, it can be from different, as we discussed, it can be from the cars, it can be from the aircrafts, it can be from the ambulance, it can also be from the loudspeakers, it can also be from the instruments or conducting of an activity, or it can be because of the music. So anything which has jarring effect, that is what is going to lead to different sources of noise pollution. So different sources of noise pollution basically include, let's say for example, we have a festival and there is a loudspeaker and the loudspeaker is throwing its voice, and this is beyond the established and the threshold that is already present. This can lead to what is called as the noise pollution. Or there is excessive industrial activity that is taking place. Let's say for example, construction related activity that is taking place, or there is a lot of sound that is emanating from that particular place, or it is because of the traffic related, there is continuous honking that is taking place. These are the different sources, and ultimately vehicle transportation, construction sites, social events like the loudspeakers, festivals, all this can lead to the noise pollution emanating from a particular place. So these are the different sources of noise pollution. And what could be the likely effects of noise pollution? What is the impact on the health? Noise pollution affects both human as well as the animals. There will be contraction of the blood vessels, making skin pale as well, excessive adrenaline in the bloodstream, which is responsible for the high blood pressure. This can also lead to muscle contraction, leading to nervous breakdown. The adverse reactions are coupled with change in hormonal levels when it comes to the sound and air pollution. There will be adverse reactions regarding to the health, which affects the person's behavior as well. The most immediate and acute effects of noise pollution is hearing impairment, diminishes part of the auditory system. Prolonged exposure to the noise will have certain frequency, which could lead to damages to the inner ear as well. There is impulsive noise, which may cause psychological and pathological disorder. Ultrasonic sound can also have digestive, respiratory and cardiovascular issues. Then the recent reports also suggest blood is thickened by the excessive noise. Noise pollution can also affect optical system as well, that is the vision part, and this will also, severe noise pollution can also have pupillary dilation, impairment of the night vision and decrease in the rate of color perception. These are the effects of the noise pollution. So this could lead to stress, hypertension, jarring effect, increase of the blood pressure, so on and so forth. So how is that we overcome this particular issue? In order to control the noise pollution, what is that we can do? In case there is a particular area which is declared as a silent zone, no traffic activities or sound pollution or any such issues should be taken up in the silent zone. In case there are employees working in a specific area, they should also be provided with ear equipments as well, so that no sound enters their ears. They are able to maintain and sustain their activity on one side, and at the same time take care of their health as well. And highway traffic is how we have to control. Let's say for example, it is passing through a central city. Such huge vehicles should not be allowed in to enter the city. What we need to have is the outer ring roads, where these huge machines or these huge vehicles will have to travel outside the city premises. If we are able to come up with such mechanisms, we will be able to control the noise pollution. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about biosphere reserves. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. We all love tourism. Who doesn't love tourism? We would want to visit different places as well. We would want to try out different cuisine as well. We want to try out different kinds of cultures, see what their cultural aspirations are, their clothing are, and ultimately want to travel as much as possible. But as and when we travel to a particular place, one ways of us polluting that place or that region is by using the plastic bottles. Let's say for example, we go to a particular place, we would not want to carry a water bottle. So what do? We buy these plastic bottles, drink it and ultimately throw it. And as a result of plastic pollution, what we have is significant damage to the environment. So in order to overcome this particular issue, recently there was an example that has taken place. In the island of Principal Biosphere Reserve, San Tome and Principe in Africa, school children have been equipped with stainless steel bottles for drinking water, so the daily production and consumption of the single-use plastics can be completely avoided. So once such steps have been taken, where school children have been given steel bottles so that they can make use of it every single day instead of the plastic bottles. And these plastic bottles can also have negative health impact as well, as this can increase the concentration of the plastic in our body, and ultimately this could have significant impact on our health. In In order to overcome all these issues, one such example that the author gives is provide steel bottles so that they can carry it. This is what is one such example taken in this article. So the author here goes on to say that we have what is called as the biosphere reserves. These biosphere reserves can be broadly broken down into 3 zones. What are these 3 zones? One is what is called as the core zone, then what we have is the buffer zone, and the final is where what we have is the transition zone. So these biosphere reserves, as the very name denotes, are the reserves or the area where we are protecting the plants and the animals, the fauna that are present in that particular area, basically to continue the sustainable practices. So what we have is animals in that place, what we have is plants in that particular place. So in order to preserve them, conserve them, protect them, what we have is declaration of the biosphere reserves. So the biosphere reserves are those areas where we have intact plants and animal species, and this has to be sustainable as well. So this can be broadly categorized into core areas. What are these core areas? This is a particular region in a forest or in a biosphere reserve where no human activity will take place. So here what we will have is the plants, what we will have is the animals, and there will be no measures whatsoever when it comes to any activity. So no activity will take place, none of the interference will take place, and this particular place is kept in pristine in its form, vegetative in its nature, and the green plants and the species and biodiversity that are present will be respected and will be conserved with utmost no interference in this particular place. And then what we have is the buffer zone. In the buffer zone, what we will have is some activities which can take place. Let's say, for example, in the buffer zone, what we can have is a tourism, then what we can have is a human settlement, then what we can have is the monitoring, research and development, educational activities and educational activities that is taking place. All these activities will take place only with the support of the government and the permission given by the government. So what we will have is a symbiotic relationship. So this symbiotic relationship and the acceptance of the nature, so what we will have is a symbiotic relationship between the nature as well as us. So in this particular backdrop, in core areas, there will be no activities whatsoever. In buffer area, we will have some activities, and that is for the safeguard of the conservation of this particular area, where there can be tourism, human settlement, research, education, monitoring, so on and so forth. So limited activities will take place. In the transition zone, finally, what we will have is more activities which will take place, and this happens to be the outermost region. So the innermost region is the core, then what we will have is the buffer zone, and the outermost region happens to be the transition zone, where communities basically practice socio-culture and ecologically sustainable human activities. So in the transition zone, more activities take place. So in order to protect, conserve these biosphere reserves, what we have is the World Biosphere Day that takes place every year on November 3rd. So what is the World Biosphere Day? It is celebrated every year on November 3rd each year to raise awareness of the importance of the biosphere reserves and to promote their conservation and the sustainable use. So in order to protect them, conserve them and take it to the next generation for the sustainable living and the activities, what we have is November 3rd represented and celebrated and observed as the World Biosphere Reserve Day. In the heart of each biosphere reserve lies what is called as the core zone, which we just discussed, providing habitat for the flora and fauna, protecting the water, soil, air and biota as a whole system. Then we did discuss that we have is what is called as the buffer zone, which is surrounding the core zone where people live and work in harmony with the nature. And finally, we did discuss what we have is a transition zone, where it is about cultural and societal practices with respect to the human activities. So apart from the declaration of the biosphere reserve, there are a couple of other programs and initiatives that have been taken by the United Nations. So what are these? For example, we have the United Nations Developmental Program, we have the United Nations Environmental Program, we also have International Union for the Conservation of the Nature. So apart from declaring a particular place as the biosphere reserve and also raising an awareness, which happens to be a measure taken, there are a couple of other measures that have been taken by the United Nations, says this article. Accordingly, the UNESCO, there are currently 748 biosphere reserves across 134 countries, including 22 transboundary sites, enhancing the country's cooperation with another country as well. So these biosphere reserves are very, very important when it comes to the conservation of the animals as well as the plant species. So what is the importance of the biosphere reserve? One, we would be able to adapt to the nature. As much as the nature is able to provide us everything, we have to cooperate with the nature. So for the flourishing and the sustenance of the human nature, these biosphere reserves are very vital. So the resilience of the nature that even amidst the humans' responses. So as much as we are responding negatively to the nature, if the nature has to respond in a positive way, we also have to bring a change. We also have to bring a change in the way that we deal with the nature. So that way of dealing with the nature is by the establishment of the biosphere reserve. In case we are able to sustain these activities in the biosphere reserve in an utmost respectable way, we would be able to have a symbiotic relationship with the nature. Added to it, we would have in the biosphere reserve all types of environments as well as the forest. Let's say for example, we have different types of tropical rainforest or the alpine deserts, and we provide also home to number of species and different tribal heartlands as well. So when we speak about the biosphere reserve, it will have all types of forest types, that is the tropical rainforest, deciduous rainforest, so on and so forth, and we also allow the tribals to live in this particular area where we are respecting the tribal rights, and there is also protection of the other species as well. Added to it, these biosphere reserves are also helping in combating the climate change. How? Let's say for example, when it comes to the climate change, these climate change factors have to be mitigated. So one of the major factors that we require is what is called as the forest. Why? Because when there is forest, they are acting as the carbon sinks. So there is excessive carbon that is released by the anthropogenic induced factors. There is emission of carbon by the vehicular emissions as well. So these forests are ultimately acting as the carbon sinks, which basically means they are sucking in or they are absorbing the excessive carbon. So the forests have been able to absorb the excessive carbon and acting as the carbon sink. So we are able to manage the climate change crisis, and we are able to ensure that climate change manifestation is reduced over a period of time. So these are the advantages. One, we are able to have a symbiotic relationship with the nature because of the biosphere reserve. We have the people and the tribals who are present in that particular area, so they are able to live. So what we have is again relationship with the biosphere reserve, and this is also able to combat and mitigate the impact of the climate change. Added to it, we've also had different communities also take part, recognize the importance of the biosphere reserve. For example, we have the Sundarban Biosphere Reserve in India. Local communities are working together to manage the mangroves. In the Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve in India, local communities including women are also forming self-help group to basically protect and develop ecotourism as well. So people are forming self-help groups. They are taking individual level expertise as well. They are forming groups so that they can ultimately protect the biosphere reserve. So this article goes on to say that we have taken steps in the past, we will have to take steps in the near future so that we are able to safeguard these biosphere reserves, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about, is the United Nations toothless in ending the wars? This article basically goes on to say that we have had wars in the past, one with respect to Russia and Ukraine, second is recently with respect to Israel as well as Palestine in the form of Hamas. So the United Nations is not able to stop any of these activities. Why? That is because of couple of reasons. The author takes into picture couple of questions and answers them one by one. Why is the UN ineffective in bringing a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict? That is because when you look at the Israel-Hamas conflict, it is not just about these two countries, but it is also about larger area as well. When you go back to the 1945s, we had the establishment of the United Nations. Immediately up until 1990, we had the Soviet Union which was present, and you also had the United States of America. These two were the major powers that were in picture. But after the balkanization of the Soviet Union, what we had was a unipolar world in the form of United States of America. So United States of America with its unipolar world is not able to control, that is United Nations is not able to control United States of America. In case they want to create a war, go on a war, they are going on a war. For example, when it comes to Iraq as well, when it comes to Iraq, they said that there is weapons of the mass destruction, so they have to control it or it will be a problem to the entire world. So they went and launched a war in Iraq. They also launched a war in Afghanistan as well, and Libya was all good under Gaddafi, but again they said that there is arms of which could actually impact the larger human rights, so they also went to Libya as well. So in all those places where there was some sort of control, there was some sort of serenity, there was some sort of peace that was maintained, you have United States of America going to that particular place, acting as a messiah for the global community, but then all that they create is instability in that particular region. So the major issue is that after the 1990, when there was balkanization of the communities, you had United States of America which is supporting these causes according to its own whims, which basically means that since there are few countries which are supported by United States of America, they are acting as per the calls of the United States of America, which is why the United Nations is not working effectively. The second factor is with respect to the veto power. Most of these powers also have the veto. You have the 5 countries, let's say for example United Kingdom, then you have Russia, then you have France, then you have United States of America and China. These countries have the what is called as the veto power. In case there is a legislation, these countries do not like it, they can ultimately veto it, which means it will not be granted as a final outcome. And ultimately, even if some countries want to stop it, some countries may entertain it, and as a result, conflicts are not being stopped as well. When you look at the world powers, these are the permanent members. These are the 5 permanent members, but this was in the 1945. So all those powers who happened to win the Second World War, they went on to become what is called as the members or the permanent members. But now times have changed. When times have changed, new countries will also have to be included. Since new countries are not included, for example, there is no representation from Africa. Apart from China, India being the largest democracy in the world is not got the representation in the United Nations Security Forum. Then there are no countries from South America, Latin American countries like Brazil or Argentina, so on and so forth, and majority of the countries are not represented as well based on the continent level, based on the contribution, based on the population. This ultimately reflects the failed reality. If many countries are not part of this United Nations Security Council which is able to stop it, how are we going to stop the conflict? The United Nations Security Council ultimately have to stop it, but then they do not have the powers. There is no representation of the countries in this United Nations Security Council, and as a result we are not able to stop it, and ultimately is creating a chaos, says the author. So if the United Nations is not providing a solution, whom do we look up to? 128 countries voted for a UN resolution calling for a humanitarian pause, but the problem is that major powers are not willing to see eye to eye on the most issue of ceasefire. If one does want to communicate it and wants to bring an end to it, then there is another country which is preventing it, and that is the major problem as to why we are not able to stop the wars. The author also brings into picture India. The author asks, the question was asked whether India can play a mediatory role. The answer to this is no. Why? Because we have our interest with Israel. We also have our interest with the Palestinian people. In fact, we've also sent some of the important goods and services to the Palestine during this particular war as well. So India cannot take one side at this particular moment. We need to balance both the sides. So India may not become a right mediator, says the author, because we have our own specific interest in both the regions with respect to Israel as well as with respect to the Palestine. So we cannot take one side. So it is for the larger community, all countries, to come together and ultimately settle the issue. It is not about taking sides, that it is not about Israel or it is not about Palestine, it is about the humanity as a whole. It is the Hamas, which happens to be a terrorist organization, which immediately started launching rockets on Israel, and Israel as a reversal back has hit the Palestinian civilian groups as well. So what we require is the elimination of the terrorist organization and respect of human rights by Israel, and civilians should not be hit because of the Hamas terrorist organization. But Hamas are banking on the civilians, so there is an understanding that needs to be created, and this war has to end on the basis of humanitarian support is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Antony Blinken, Lloyd Austin to visit New Delhi next week for 2+2 dialogue. Once they visit, we will have an elaborate discussion of this issue. But as of now, all that you have to understand from the preliminary examination point of view, what is this 2+2? 2+2 basically means that you will have 2 ministers from United States of America and 2 ministers from India. Which are these 2 ministers and the ministries that will be involved? One happens to the Ministry of External Affairs. The other what we have is the Minister of Defense. These 2 ministers, External Affairs and Defense ministers, will come together from both the countries. They will ultimately discuss the problem areas and the future course of action that needs to be discussed, and they will also discuss about the rift with Canada. As of now, we have the rift with Canada as well. So in case United States of America is wanting to settle this dispute, that will also be discussed as part of this discussion. But once we have the people coming to India have an elaborate discussion, we will take it up in a more elaborate way. This is all we have to understand with respect to this article. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.